Nothing lasts forever. Not even the Imperium of Man. The greatest empire the galaxy has ever known is immune to the ravages of fate. Even the return of the avenging sun merely delays the inevitable. It is heresy to give voice to these words. But the hour is late, and the threat of torment and execution no longer fills me with terror as it once did, and so I speak the truth without hesitation. Nothing lasts forever. The stars boil and the void screams. The nameless beings of the Immaterium spill forth from the Cicatrix Maledictum in untold numbers, glutting themselves upon the fear and torment of mortal souls. Humanity fights its last hopeless battle. Soon it shall be consumed entirely. I do not speak these words with sorrow. The birth of new life is always accompanied by tremors of agony. Always must the old order perish to give rise to the new. That which we call humanity shall pass into history, as it should, and something far greater shall rise to fill its place. Even now I feel it. Trillions of voices join in communion, united even across the vast expanse of the Imperium. Faint at first, but growing stronger by the hour. Some shall call them saviors, others deem them as corrupted witchkin. They are neither. They're the heralds of a new age. Excerpt from the writings of Thanius the Sage, executed for heresy and sedition. Faith and Fury. The galaxy is in turmoil. Fully half of the Imperium of mankind is engulfed in darkness and terror, and the forces of the Dark Gods rampage across humanity's domain. In the Taladus system, a ferocious war rages between the ranks of the God Emperor and the servants of the ruinous powers. The immense warp storm known as the Cicatrix Maledictum has carved the Imperium in two. Humanity's defenders, including the mighty space marines of the Adeptus Astartes, find themselves assailed on all fronts, desperately attempting to fend off the onslaught of the servants of chaos and opportunistic Xenos raiders. Even amidst the heartlands of the Emperor's realm, close to holy terror itself, anarchy and terror reign. The traitorous warlords of the heretic Astartes launched their hate-fueled crusades with impunity, aiming to tear apart the Imperium they once served and spread the insidious worship of the dark gods amongst the terrified populace. Taladus system is one such ravaged domain, a once shining stronghold of the Imperial Creed, now transformed into a war zone, contested by the worshippers of the Emperor of mankind, and those sworn to the Chaos Pantheon. As this war of faiths grows ever more bloody and brutal, the psychic trauma generated by the Cicatrix Maledictum gives rise to miracles and psychic manifestations of unrivaled scale and power. To some, these bizarre and terrifying occurrences are yet further proof that the galaxy is approaching its inevitable final hour of doom. To others, these events are proof of the God Emperor's divine will, actualized to his loyal servants. Whatever the truth of it, this surge of empiric disruption will unravel the tapestry of the 41st millennium forever, giving rise to a new era of psychic awakening. Faith Unbound. The time of the Great Rift found the Imperium reeling, assailed on a million fronts by the surging forces of chaos. It was only the return of the Primarch Reboot Gilliman and the fury of the Primaris Space Marines that held back the tide. At this dark hour, the power of faith would offer humanity the faintest glimmer of hope. The Indomitus Crusade swept forth from terror with furious purpose, driving the forces of chaos before them and bringing hope to hundreds of besieged worlds. None but the Primarch of the Ultramarines could have foreseen such a decisive counterattack. To those whom he commanded, it seemed that Reboot Gilliman did not rest for a moment. No sooner had one victory been achieved than he began to lay the foundations of the next. The Crusade's momentum could not be slow, for that might allow the heretical forces an opportunity to regroup. So it was that as the crusade ventured deeper and deeper into occupied territory, pushing into regions ravaged by demonic hordes and migrating Xenos fleets, those territories in their wake were left to manage as best they could. The threats they faced were many. In the aftermath of the Great Rift, the entire galaxy was stricken by nightmarish phenomena, temporal distortion and terrible warp storms. It was the Imperium Nihilus, those regions that lay beyond the line of the Great Rift, that suffered the worst of these occurrences. But nowhere in the Imperium of Man was left unscarred. Even across the gleaming sanctuary worlds of the Segmentum Solar, horror struck. Isolated warp storms tore through unprepared systems, swallowing battle fleets and spilling demonic entities across the surface of worlds. Such was the anarchic disruption of reality that Chaos Armadas, Orc-raiding fleets and other deadly Xenos forces were carried vast distances across the tides of the warp and vomited back into real space on the far side of the galaxy. Worse still, the predations of the great enemy intensified. Like slavering wolves, the heretic Astartes and their allies struck at the underbelly of the Imperium, emerging from the roiling stars to raid and pillage across the Segmentum Solar. Many of these incursions were directionless and savage, little more than the servants of darkness indulging their base desires for blood and slaughter. Yet they masked a greater plan, overseen by those who serve the will of the dark gods, with a far more insidious agenda. The word-bearers sought to spread their heretic faith into the very heart of humanity's domain. The Sons of Lorgar had foreseen a struggle not only for the territory of the Imperium, but its very spirit. The souls of mortals were the currency over which the war of faith would be fought. Allying with fellow traitor legions such as the piratical reavers of the Night Lords and the relentless Iron Warriors, the word-bearers sought to spread fear and hopelessness far and wide. Through dark ritual, system-wide sacrifice and terror tactics, they intensified the power of chaos, hoping to break the will of the Imperium's mortal populace. Those who accepted the primacy of the Dark Gods were spared, their collective damnation empowering the spread of corruption. Blind to the subtle hexagrammatic patterns of the word-bearers' rituals, Imperial forces failed to recognize either the disaster building behind their lines, or the rampant spread of panic and heresy. Planet by planet, the shadow of chaos spread. Only the Sisters of Battle, the zealous warrior champions of the Imperial Creed, foresaw this deadly threat. Many a canoness of the Adepta Sororitas witnessed the same apocalyptic visions, moors of utter blackness stretching wide to devour the light of the faithful, twin-headed Aquillas torn apart by hungering shadows, and stars drowned in the blood of innocents. The holy orders of the Sisterhood could not spread word of the horror they had uncovered, for across the galaxy, astropathic communications were drowned out by warp screams and the howling static of demonic entities. Word would have to be delivered in person. Thus it was that the Orders Militant of the Adepta Sororitas dispatched their battle fleets in greater numbers than ever before, guided by the visions granted by their beloved God Emperor. Even as the Sisters of Battle brought hope and fierce defiance to scores of war-ravaged worlds, it seemed certain that the word-bearers' plans would come to fruition. Yet the Sons of Lorgar had not counted upon the new and dramatic phenomena that began to manifest across those contested planets. The immense eruption of psychic energy unleashed by the Cicatrix Maledictum gave rise not only to warp-spawn nightmares, but acts of faith and wondrous miracles on a scale unheard of. Humble mortal worshippers of the God Emperor bore witness to manifestations of the Emperor Angelic, flocks of golden eagles and columns of scintillating flame that seared demonic and heretic flesh alike. These miracles galvanized those who bore witness to them, firming their resolve and filling their hearts with defiance, even in the face of the horrors unleashed against them. So began a great war of faith that set the dark prophets of the heretic Astartes against the acts of hope and belief inspired by the Sisters of Battle and their allies. For 10,000 years, the sanctified Taladus system shone as a beacon of humanity's might, a realm of glittering shrine worlds populated by billions of pious servants of the God Emperor. Its glory seemed eternal and untarnishable. The Taladus system lay in the center of the Veritas subsector, a region of space replete with Imperial worlds and navigable warp routes. It was seen as a stronghold of the Ecclesiarchy, a vibrant symbol of the Imperial Creed's galaxy-spanning influence and power. Its capital world of Benediction was entirely covered by a golden theocropolis of astonishing scale, the entirety of the planet's surface reshaped and sculpted into a mausoleum temple to house the corpses of thousands of saints. Many faithful pilgrims of the God Emperor would gladly have given their lives just to see the spire mountains of Lux Aeternis, to walk amidst the statues of long-dead priests and hierophants, to hear the sound of psalms echoing through the artificial valleys and stained-glass towers of the Grand Honorificum. The ambitious project was started by none other than the legendary ecclesiarch Sebastian Thor during the 36th millennium. Thor led a great revolt against the depravities of his predecessor, Ecclesiarch and High Lord Goj Vandir. Thoroughly insane and murderous, Vandir had become convinced that he alone was the God Emperor's divine instrument and successor. Anyone who questioned his increasingly deranged pronouncements was subjected to hideous torture, then a summary execution at the hands of the Daughters of the Emperor, a sect of pious warriors that had been swayed into Vandir's service. The Taladus system suffered terribly during those dark days. Its governor, Hectus Carmine, was one of the first to openly and publicly decry the outrages of Goj Vandir. In doing so, he earned the mad ecclesiarch's fury. Carmine's homeworld of Taladus was invaded by forces loyal to Vandir, who was faced with the governor's steadfast Astra Militarum regiments and thousands of the God Emperor's faithful, who refused to acknowledge Vandir's rule. After a fierce conflict that raged for many months, Carmine and hundreds of his co-conspirators were finally captured and put to trial. The deposed governor was brutalized publicly for more than a month and ultimately burned alive on the steps of his palatial residence, while his populace was forced to witness. Not content with this blood price, Vandir ordered a grand purge of heretics across the subsector. In worlds such as Boras Minor, Giddas and Satropal, the measures taken by the insane ecclesiarch would live in infamy. Once a prosperous system famed for its splendor, Taladus was reduced to a shadow of its former glory. Sebastian Thor was the leader of the Confederation of Light, an alliance of faithful souls determined to end Vandir's time as ecclesiarch, which had come to be known as the Reign of Blood. Thor gathered his forces, which included several Space Marine chapter masters, to Holy Terror, where they overthrew the tyrant and his loyal servants. In the process, Thor revealed the depths of Vandir's heresy to the Daughters of the Emperor, who repaid their master's lies with the edge of a power sword. As Vandir's severed head struck the floor of his chamber, the terror that had enveloped the Imperium was finally ended. In the aftermath of this bloody coup, Thor, convinced the High Lords of Terror of the righteousness of his actions, was chosen to become the new ecclesiarch. Thor was a bold and determined reformer. He decreed that the Daughters of the Emperor, having shown their true loyalty, would become the chamber militant of the ecclesiarchy, renamed the Sisters of Battle. They would faithfully serve the will of the God Emperor. Having put in place measures to ensure that an event as disastrous as Vandir's Reign of Blood could not occur again, Thor departed Terra and began a grand tour of the Imperium's holy sites. One of the first subsectors the new ecclesiarch visited was Veritas, and its broken capital of Taladus was his first port of call. Though they had suffered greatly at the hands of the Church, the survivors of Vandir's purges greeted their new ecclesiarch reverently when he visited the ruins of Taladus. Moved by their faith, Thor ordered the construction of a grand monument to Hectus Carmine, and all who had lost their lives during the Reign of Blood. The limitless coffers of the ecclesiarchy were opened, and upon the ashes of the past were fashioned soaring temples and mausoleum cities of gold. Thor decreed that Taladus be renamed Benediction in honor of the fallen. Over the following centuries, the power and influence of the Veritas subsector grew unchecked. The immense wealth generated by sacred tithes, pilgrimage tolls, and the generous offerings of the God Emperor's faithful flowed back into the vaults of the ecclesiarchy. In order to protect this valuable and imposing symbol of their power, Thor's successors ensured that several fortress sanctuaries of the Sisters of Battle were built upon Martyr's Rest and its neighbouring worlds. Entire Astra Militarum regiments were diverted to protect its borders, and the Ecclesiarch's tithe collectors roamed the space lanes of the Veritas subsector, ensuring that the God Emperor's due was paid in full. The dockyards at Satropol were amongst the largest in the Imperium. Thousands upon thousands of vessels were packed together in cramped mooring claws, kept stationary for months and sometimes even years as the Ecclesiarchy's agents methodically ensured that every tithe was collected. Those who failed to pay what was owed, or in any way roused the ire of the Church, were dealt with by the ruthlessly zealous Gredask Illuminators. These crack Astra Militarum regiments did not technically answer to the Adeptus Ministorum, as the decree passive, passed in the aftermath of the Reign of Blood, prevented the Church from maintaining such a military body ever again. Yet such was the ferocity of their faith, the Illuminators maintained suspiciously close ties with members of the Taladoran priesthood. So did Taladus thrive for thousands of years, even when the Great Rift tore open and Terra itself was savaged by the demonic hordes of the Dark Gods. The Veritas subsector remained untouched. The prophets of benediction claimed that the faith of Taladus lived under the eternal protection of the God Emperor, a reward for all that they had suffered. Such predictions would prove utterly false. The Dark Gods had set their eyes upon this gleaming jewel in humanity's crown, and their greatest mortal champions planned to see it burn in the fires of chaos. Seeds of corruption. The ruling priesthood of the Veritas subsector may have believed that their domain was an incorruptible bastion of the imperial creed, but in truth, the seeds of heresy had lurked unnoticed within its borders for many a year. It was the infamous Corphoron, keeper of the faith and confidant of the Daemon Primarch Lorgar, who plotted the ruin of the Taladus system. None bore more hatred and contempt for the mortal servants of the God Emperor than Ferron, who had played a pivotal role in the earth-shattering events of the Horus heresy. Veritas was the symbol of everything he despised: ignorance, weakness, and petty mortal greed. Moreover, he believed that if the great shrine world of benediction were to fall, it would spread pure terror across Segmentum Solar, a fear that could be exploited and harnessed to further empower the Dark Gods. One world would fall, then another, and another. Even before the nightmare of the Great Rift, heretic cults had emerged across the Taladus, Leonas, and Keyfire systems, seeded by the dark apostles of the Word-bearers. These prophets and demagogues did not yet encourage open worship to chaos, for they knew that such overt displays of heresy would draw the full ire of the ecclesiarchy and the holy orders down upon them. Instead, they cultivated certain subcults and splinter factions of imperial faith that had been barely tolerated, or in some cases actively persecuted, by the Adeptus Ministorum, such as the Witnesses of Boras Minor, who believed that only by enduring appalling grief and loss could one become close to the God Emperor. Other targeted cults included the ascetics of the Farine Brotherhood, who saw divinity in humbleness and vows of silence, and the cult of the Cleansing Comet, who dwelt within the deadly asteroid field on the edge of the Taladus known as the Tears of the Emperor, seeking to commune with their sacred deity. All of these sects had suffered greatly at the hands of Cardinal Morost Bolifax, regent of the Veritas subsector and a staunch traditionalist. Suspicious of the deviations of faith that had developed in his domain, Bolifax initiated a series of purges to remove subversive figures who dared to deviate from their unequivocal truth of the imperial creed. He sent his most fervent missionaries forth to cleanse these impurities. Shrines and shantytowns were burned, tombs and scriptures seized, and more than 10,000 apostates were crucified or stoned to death for their heathen practices. A dozen subcults of the Imperial Creed were deemed as heretical by the Cardinal's decree. Anyone found practicing their belief or rituals was to be subjected to immediate torture and execution. What remained of these sectors were infiltrated by charismatic orators and zealous iconoclasts in thrall to the dark gods, and directed by the masters of the word-bearers. At first, these figureheads preached the supremacy of the God Emperor. They railed against the tyrannical rule of the Minnesota priests and the purges and executions they had inflicted upon innocent souls for a simple divergence of belief. Stirring up anger and a simmering resentment against the cruel Bolifax, they compared his excesses to those of the infamous Goj Vandire. The brutality of Bolifax's crackdown was the perfect gift for the cultist demagogues of Veritas. By playing upon the climate of hatred and fear, it was almost too easy for them to indoctrinate new followers in the worship of the Chaos Pantheon, and an ever-growing number of disenchanted pilgrims were driven into their clutches. Patiently they sowed the seeds of true heresy, hiding the nature of their foul beliefs behind metaphor and rhetoric. Soul by soul they cultivated flocks of the damned, and established sails upon distant worlds, even the gleaming capital of benediction itself. The dark apostles of the word-bearers continued to direct this shadow war from afar, all the while preparing for their eventual assault upon Talados. Calling upon thousand-year-old debts and oaths, Corpharon, the Dark Cardinal, assembled a conglomeration of allies from across several traitor legions and renegade chapters. The piratical Night Lord's warmonger Yaras Kine was swayed with promises of pious souls to torment, and the finest pickings of a resource-rich system. The Iron Warriors assented to join the destruction, though they had little interest in the great war of faith espoused by Corpharon, and sought only a testing ground for their demonic war engines. The infernal house of Frashul and Commentis pledged their Chaos Knights to the unholy cause, and millions of cultists and traitorous guard regiments were readied, ritually scarred and branded with sigils of conviction. The grand work gathered pace as the galaxy grew darker. Ruinous hexagrammatic patterns were laid down, monuments of fell power erected, and mass sacrifices prepared. Industrial cults upon the mining world of Koras Veltes used immense excavation lasers to burn 8-pointed stars into the bedrock of the planet. The witnesses of Boras Minor, now calling themselves the Cult of Loss, slipped into the space lanes of Satropol, infiltrating its tightly packed dockyard arms and smuggling in weapons and improvised explosives as they awaited the moment of their uprising. Chaos cults grew in strength, their numbers swelling daily. And then, with a birth scream that dragged untold billions of malformed horrors into reality, the great rift broke open across the galaxy. Proud Cadia fell, the last barrier between the Eye of Terror and the Segmentum Solar. Demonic entities manifested upon Holy Terror, and the blood god Khorne closed his fist around the heart of humanity. To Corpharon's fury, there were whispers that Primarch Reboot Guilliman had returned. He had once driven the Power Claw into the heart of the Dark Cardinal. Only after receiving a warp-granted vision of the resurrected Primarch departing from Terra at the head of an enormous crusade did Corpharon unleash the Hounds of War. No less than 13 massive battleships carved into the Talados system, each blood-red and daubed with the iconography of the corrupted 17th Legion. 8 of these planet-killing behemoths made a course for benediction, while the remainder set out for the system's other prominent worlds. Accompanying this invasion force was an armada of lesser vessels, night black reaver ships, rusted hulks and cargo cutters. As the Word-Bearer's invasion fleet smashed into the outnumbered and outgunned battlefield Centanis, responsible for the defense of Benediction, it also vomited forth a hail of raise-up spiked Dreadclaw drop pods. The inhabitants of the glorious Shrine World looked to the skies and saw a rain of fire as the Word-Bearers commenced their assault. The cords they had so patiently seeded across the system rose up in armed rebellion, and the astropathic relays of Boras Minor and Gridask fell silent. Talados was alone, and the enemy was at its threshold. Darkness descends. As the hordes of chaos descended upon the Taladus system, all hope seemed lost. Yet even as flames engulfed the shrine world of benediction and demonic monstrosities spilled across the surface of multiple worlds, the faith of the God Emperor's flock manifested in new and terrifying ways. Onslaught of Chaos. Corpheron knew that the success of the Chaos invasion of Taladus relied upon laying claim to its capital of benediction. The Dark Cardinal was obsessed with symbology and ritual, and knew that the shining embodiment of the Imperial Creed must burn. Only when the highest spires of the Grand Honorificum were scrawled with the symbols of the Dark Gods and littered with the impaled bodies of the corpse Emperor's servants would the will of Taladus's subjects truly be broken. His own word-bearers spearheaded the assault on this vital target, slaughtering its defenders and any mortals foolish enough to defy or deny the primacy of the Pantheon. Yet the Dark Cardinal of the Word-Bearers was well aware that if the Imperials could isolate the battle at Benediction, then they could bring fearsome numbers to bear against the Chaos Invasion force. This was where Pharaon's tentative allies would prove their worth. Even before the Word-Bearers had fired their first shots upon the surface of Benediction, Yaras Kine and his Night Lord's warband had drawn the first blood of the Taladus conflict. A kill team of Night Lord specialists had descended upon the astropathic relay at Satropol, butchering its occupants before setting off a cyclonic charge at the heart of the complex. At the same time, the battleship Nightmare of Selix slipped from the warp at the far edge of the Taladus system. This cursed vessel contained thousands upon thousands of captured astropaths, strapped into engines of torment and watched over by sinister warriors of the Night Lords. The Sons of Curse had performed the most horrific tortures upon these luckless souls, driving them into a state of constant pain-addled frenzy. Their combined psychic scream echoed out across the stars, interfering with long-range Vox communications and scrambling the minds of ship-borne navigators. Imperial reinforcements were dragged out of the warp into the killing fields of the terrors of the Emperor, the blazing asteroid field at the rimward edge of the Taladus system. There the Night Lord's fleet waited, anticipating a feast of terror and plunder. Meanwhile, the Iron Warriors under the command of Warpsmith Etrogar were tasked with containing the forces at Gridask, the Soul Harvesters. These horrific creations were spaceborne fortress factories that consisted of a central demon forge, surrounded by snaking tentacles of hell-forged metal. These parasitic engines would embed themselves deep into a planet's crust, their boarding tentacles disgorging iron warriors into weak points in their enemy's defenses. Meanwhile, the roaring furnace at the structure's heart would feed upon flesh, metal, and the souls of the slain in order to spew out fresh demon engine reinforcements. As far as Corpheron was concerned, these assaults were merely a diversion from his grand assault upon Benediction. They would divide Imperial reinforcements, securing him the time he needed to oversee the destruction of Benediction and its rebirth as a shrine of worship to the Chaos Pantheon. The assault upon Taladus came entirely without warning, and the system's significant Astromilitarum presence was left reeling before the Chaos onslaught. On the surface of Benediction, a makeshift coalition of shattered Imperial Guard regiments fell back to the Grand Honorificum, there uniting under the command of Caroness Serita of the Order of Our Martyred Lady. Battle fleets Ios and Ceremes, orbiting the bastion world of Gridask prior to the assault, suffered terrible losses as they attempted short-range warp jumps to the embattled capital. Warp interference claimed the lives of dozens of navigators, their skulls bursting in a shower of bone and gore, unable to contain the magnitude of the Night Lord's corrupted signal. Others felt themselves inexorably drawn towards the psychic scream of desperation. On all fronts, the Chaos forces surged forward, their momentum terrifying to behold. Upon the surface of Benediction itself, the word-bearers under the direction of Corpheron committed terrible atrocities and mass executions, weakening the fragile membrane between reality and the warp. Within the Sanctum Solaris, at the heart of the Grand Honorificum, more than 10,000 priests, acolytes, and non-militant sororitas gathered in communal prayer, not moving, eating, or taking water for days. Even as the guns of the Word-bearers thundered relentlessly, they prayed to the God Emperor for salvation, and the light of their faith was a furious beacon visible from across the cold blackness of space. Just as the hour seemed darkest, the Honorificum's long-range prognosticator arrays picked up a surge of activity on the coreward edge of the Taladus system. At first it was feared that this new presence was merely another fleet of Chaos warships, but a macro-encoded Vox transmission from the strike cruiser Fulminating Hammer brought the first sign of hope to the beleaguered defenders of Benediction. Captain Mearsan of the Salamanders had heard the pleas of the faithful, and led a spearhead of Adeptus Astartes warriors to the defense of Taladus. At his ritual site on the banks of the river Carmine, within an 8-pointed star made up of the bloodied corpses of saints and warriors, Corphoron saw the arrival of the Imperial Warfleet. Such a response had been expected, of course, and the appropriate preparations had been made. As far as Pharon was concerned, it was all the better that the Corpse Emperor's lapdogs were here to witness the brutal fall of Benediction. Flames of Heresy. The Word-bearers converged upon the capital of Benediction with the full fury of their blasphemous hosts, unleashing hordes of ravening demons and frenzied cultists upon the unprepared shrine world. Yet Benediction was not without formidable champions of its own. Dark Onslaught. The fury of the Word-bearers' assault brought terror to the surface of Benediction. Dread claws punched through the stained armor-glass ceilings of mausoleums and devotional halls, and axis hatches slammed down to reveal warriors in blood-red power armor. Scraps of parchment scrawled with profane runes dangled from their battle plates, and their eyes blazed with conviction. These killers marched beneath the banners of the Dark Gods, bellowing catechisms of hate as their bolters unleashed a hail of devastation upon the world's overwhelmed Imperial garrison. The Gadrask 37th Armoured and 101st Infantry Regiments, whose impressive battle record had granted them the honour of maintaining a permanent guard over the Honorificum, were taken entirely by surprise at the speed and brutality of the assault. Worse still, hidden chaos cults emerged to throw themselves upon the defenders, spilling from the planet's underwarrens in their millions to join their masters in sacred battle. In little more than half a day, the grounds surrounding the Honorificum were in chaos hands. Amidst the shattered skeletons of cathedrals and shrines, rituals of mass sacrifice and slaughter were being performed on an industrial scale as the Word-bearers sought to draw forth demonic reinforcements. Corphoron himself oversaw these occult ceremonies, even as batteries of corrupted artillery hurled a ceaseless barrage of warp-laden shells into the Psi-Tech force field that surrounded the Honorificum. Captain Mearsan's demi-company of salamanders was greatly outnumbered by the Word-bearer host. The sons of Vulcan nonetheless went about their craft with stoic efficiency, clearing a beachhead amidst the mausoleum complexes of the Honorificum's outer grounds with flame-spewing aggressors and Centurion devastators. Captain Mearsan desired to dictate and confine the flow of battle by harrying the main concentration of the enemy, attempting to draw them into diverting their strength to engage the salamanders. In this way, further civilian casualties could be lessened, and the Space Marines could bear the brunt of the assault. However, attempts to reinforce the eastern flank of the Loyalist defenders were driven back by kill packs of possessed warriors and a fresh surge of cultist forces. Corphoron would not take Captain Mearsan's proffered bait. The Grand Honorificum remained his focus, for with its fall the Dark Cardinal would deal a mortal blow to the Imperial faith. Although they were sorely pressed, the warriors of the Order of Our Martyred Lady defended the 4 great bridges leading to the heart of the Honorificum with stubborn resolve. Warriors clad in obsidian power armor sang hymnals to the saints of Benediction and to their beloved God Emperor as they fired back against the blasphemous horde. Exorcist tanks sang, unleashed spiraling volleys of sacred rockets that pulverized entire formations of heretic invaders. The roar of heavy flamers and the thunderous bark of Godwin Diaz's pattern bolters formed a deafening percussion to accompany the psalms of the faithful. It was a brave and spirited defence, but it could not last. The blood of thousands of flayed priests spilled into the crystal waters of the River Carmine as Corferon's rituals came to a gruesome crescendo. As the river turned to crimson, it began to bubble and boil with motion. Hideous shapes crawled from the corrupted waters, wielding brazen blades and howling in savage delight. The River Carmine itself broke its banks and surged forwards towards the side shield of the Grand Honorificum. A tidal wave of superheated gore swallowed hundreds of battle sisters and guardsmen, and turned battle tanks and artillery emplacements alike into iron slurry. The moment it struck the shimmering shield of the Honorificum, the defences of the great cathedral fizzled and died. The way to the heart of benediction was open, and Corferon led his warriors forth with bellowing praises to the dark gods, they themselves taken aback by the potency of their warpcraft. Breaches in reality tore open by ritual and incantation continued to grow, drawing forth not just hordes of minor entities, but the leathery bat-winged shapes of greater demons. Bolts of summoned warp energy erupted into coruscating fireballs, and in the heat of battle several word-bearers fell, convulsing as hungry mouths and other strange mutations burst through skin and ceramite. Entire districts of benediction were overrun, and demons spilled into the halls of the Grand Honorificum itself, where the Sisters of Battle staged a desperate room-by-room stand. Miracle of the Saints' Wall. With the collapse of the last bastion between the word-bearers and the heart of benediction, the battle for the capital world seemed decided. Yet Canoness Sereta and her warriors refused to give in to despair. They fought with selfless dedication and fury, striking out with gun butts, blades and chainswords when ammunition ran dry. Those who looked upon this valorous stand were filled with a holy fire. Civilians and cosseted ministers alike took up weapons against the forces of chaos. At first, the word-bearers and their demonic allies laughed at such pitiful defiance. Yet, as the blood of the faithful spilled, spears of golden light broke through the stained armor-glass windows of the Honorificum, as the prayers of the God Emperor's servants echoed over screams and gunfire. It seemed to astonished onlookers that the dead souls of benediction arose to protect the living. Golden skull-faced spirits swept forth from ancient tombs and reliquaries, rising high into the heavens to encircle the Grand Honorificum. These manifestations formed a shield of impassable light, a radiant halo that filled the faithful who looked upon it with renewed hope. Demons and heretics that attempted to force their way through this aegis of faith were burnt to ashes. Even the word-bearers' artillery could not force a breach in the shield. Where the golden light of the Saints' Wall shone, the barrier between reality and the nightmare realm of the warp was remade. Corferon could only look on in fury, as great swathes of the demonic army he had summoned disintegrated into nothingness, howling in impotent rage as their connection to the material realm was severed. Inspired by the bizarre phenomenon they had witnessed, Meerschaum's salamanders launched fresh assaults on the advanced formations of the word-bearers, breaking through to the bridge over the River Carmine and cutting the heretic force in two. The battle for benediction had not been decided by any measure, but the momentum of the word-bearers' assault had been repelled, and the Grand Honorificum remained in loyalist hands. Still, the Dark Cardinal had no intention of retreating, not with benediction so nearly in his grasp. Whispers filtered out across the tides of the warp, dark communiques summoning chaos reinforcements to the Taladus Theatre. Wrath of Iron. Even as the fighting of benediction escalated to new heights of savagery, the Iron Warriors drew Imperial reinforcements into a brutal war of attrition on the world of Gradask. Warpsmith Etrigan had no interest in Corferon's grand plans for the Taladus system, a ruthlessly practical soul. Etrigar saw the rampant psychic disturbances unleashed by the Great Rift not as a spiritual awakening, but as an infinite source of power to be harnessed. The warpsmith entered Taladus at the helm of the Soul Harvester, Skarax Grond, more spaceborne factory than starship. This cephalopodic metal monster was empowered by an immense demon forge, a product of the Iron Warrior's darkest experience in metalomorphosis and warp engineering. It would be the first such creation to be tested in battle. With its vast alpine ranges and city-sized citadel fortresses, the bastion world of Kredask was the most heavily defended planet in the Taladus system, aside from Benediction itself. Its 7 great hive cities provided billions of souls for the Astra Militarum, and its deep reserves of promethium and super-dense minerals only added to Kredask's critical value to the Imperium, making it an irresistible target for Entragar. The Skarax Grond latched onto the surface of Kredask like an immense parasite, thrusting pseudopods the size of hab blocks deep into the earth. These snaking tentacles pulverized their way through rock and stone with siege drills and melter cannons, before bursting up from the earth within the walls of Kredask's citadel fortifications. Heretic Astartes warriors marched forth, unleashing deadly volleys of bolt rounds into their unprepared foes. At the same time, Chaos Knights of House Commentis lumbered from the gatehouse of Skarax Kron, bellowing oaths of destruction as they set upon the armored formations of the Astra Militarum. Tank after tank was blasted into molten slag, and arcs of heavy bolt fire obliterated entire formations of Kredask's infantry. All the while, the demon forge of the Skarax Grond glutted itself upon the aura of death and destruction. Blasted corpses and twisted wreckages of shattered war machines were shoveled into its furnace, as Etragar and his fellow warpsmiths stoked the hellish fires with the souls of the slain. The Skarax Grond spewed out a tide of demon engines, from scuttling spider-like venom crawlers to hulking mauler fiends that galloped into battle, eager to mutilate and destroy. Soon the Loyalists were in full flight, retreating to the polar citadel of Fortress Resolve, where they prepared to make their final stand. Forlorn Hope. Just as the cruisers of the Iron Warriors prepared orbital bombardments that would blast open the last vestiges of resistance on Kredask, the Chaos Fleet picked up a surge of warp disturbance. 2 enemy capital ships dropped out of orbit, black vessels bearing the stark white cross of the Righteous Black Templars Chapter. Castle and Dramos led a single strike force detached from the Ruthenian Crusade, all that could be spared due to the Templars' extensive campaign elsewhere across the Segmentum Solar. Fortunately, Dramos could also call upon a cadre of Imperial Knights from House Mortown, commanded by the dour yet ferocious Sir Dirkwald. Dramos scanned the latest tactical cogitations, broadcast from Fortress Resolve. The situation was grim. The Iron Warriors were sieging this polar citadel, pouring demonic forces against its shield walls, while their siege tanks kept up a relentless bombardment. Yet the true threat, Dramos quickly intuited, was the Skarax Grond. As long as the Demon Forge was operational, the traitors could replenish their forces indefinitely. Strikeforce Dawnhammer would deploy in a decisive attack upon the Soul Harvester. The warriors of House Mortan made for the surface of Kredask in their fortified Hulk bulwark landers, the heavily armoured vessels shrugging off reams of flak fire. Sir Dirkwald led a frontal assault upon the Skarax Grond. From the parapets of the Soul Harvester, Iron Warriors poured a stream of fire down upon the advancing Loyalists, while the Knights drew the attention of the Chaos Defenders. Squads of Inceptors descended upon the Soul Harvester like living comets, burning through the upper atmosphere and locking coordinates upon the pulsing shell of the Skarax Grond. They struck home with shattering force, breaching holes in the flesh-metal carapace with demolition charges, even as they fended off flocks of fire-spitting helldrakes. Castle and Dramos led the assault into the heart of the Skarax Grond, battling through the innards of the Iron Monster alongside a retinue of veteran crusaders. This assault team suffered grievous losses as the Iron Warriors assailed them at every turn, but in an act of self-sacrifice that would mark their names in the honor scrolls of their order, Dramos and his command squad managed to detonate a cyclonic charge at the heart of the structure. The resulting warp explosion swept through the Soul Harvester, immolating loyalist and heretic alike, and blasting its assembly halls and charnel factories to atoms. The Scarab convulsed and thrashed its metal tendrils like a wounded animal, but its demonic furnaces could not be snuffed out so easily. Dramos' sacrifice had bought the defenders of Gredask precious time, but the planet's fate still hung in the balance. Screams in the Void. Yaras Kaid and his Night Lord's warband found rich pickings amongst the asteroid field known as the Tears of the Emperor. Broadcasting a terrible psychic signal, they lured their prey into darkness before hunting and tormenting them with sadistic delight. Their latest quarry, however, would not prove such an easy kill. The Nightmare of Selex drifted through the Tears of the Emperor, broadcasting its terrible signal across the stars. Following the siren ship closely were the shadowed hulls of Night Lord vessels. As Imperial cruisers and escort ships were dragged off course into the belt, these Reaver ships would strike hard and fast, firing boarding hooks and unleashing hunting parties of heretic Astartes upon the stricken prey. Such was the horror let loose by the Night Lords that the Tears of the Emperor burned blood red. The asteroid field was visible from the surface of Taladus' war-torn worlds, a ragged wound in the sky that promised a bloody and terrible end. As the battle for the Taladus system raged on, more and more desperately needed reinforcements disappeared. Driven mad by the strength of the psychic broadcast, navigators were drawn unerringly into the Night Lord's trap. Astra Militarum generals and officers of the fleet despaired, for every lost ship was a heavy blow to the Imperium's hopes of containing the Taladus conflict. Salvation came from an unexpected quarter. A strike force of Vanguard Space Marines from the White Scars chapter, under the command of Jodaga Khan, had been tracking the movements of the Yaras Kain's Night Lords for several months, following the psychic spoor of the heretics Astartes' tortured victims. The White Scars had witnessed firsthand the trail of horror that the heretic Astartes had left in their wake, and their revulsion at the depravity of their fallen brethren was absolute. The Khan's stealth cruisers followed the flight of the Nightmare of Selex straight to Taladus and the Tears of the Emperor. There the Khan and his battle brothers found a graveyard of torn and twisted vessels, orbited by flayed, vacuum-frozen corpses still wearing expressions of agony. There was no sign of the siren ship itself, but the sudden shriek of proximity sensors revealed a host of incoming vessels, dagger-shaped Night Lord strike craft raging toward them at full speed. The resulting void battle was swift and brutal. The smaller Night Lord's force had approached under the cover of drifting asteroids and was upon the White Scars before the Space Marines could bring their lance batteries to bear. The cruiser Thunderstone was boarded by several kill packs of Raptors, who wreaked terrible carnage upon the crew and sabotaged several motive systems before being driven off by squads of White Scar infiltrators. As soon as the tide of battle turned, the Night Lord vessels slipped back into the impervious cover of the asteroid field. The Night Lords had turned the Tears of the Emperor into their hellish playground, mustering the deadly shifting battleground and turning it against their foes. The White Scars found themselves not only assailed by the heretic Astartes, but staggered by the devious traps and lures that the Night Lords had assembled throughout the asteroid field. Planetoids laced with cyclonic charges and astropathic signals that drew the White Scars into pre-prepared killing zones. Only the multi-spectrum precognition arrays of the White Scars' stealth cruisers allowed them to navigate a path through the haunted darkness. So began a shadow war of escalating brutality, as the warriors of Chagores sought to track down their hated foes through the maelstrom of blazing rocks and ruined spaceships. The Night Lords had spared the lives of the navigators from the gutted vessels, though the survivors found themselves subject to a far worse fate than death. Flayed, agonized, and kept alive and conscious by warp magic, they howled their torment into the void. These disruptive psychic screams obscured the siren signal broadcast by the Nightmare of Selex, rendering it all but impossible to discern the ship's exact location. Each of these lures was an ambush site guarded by kill packs of Night Lord Raptors, Chaos Space Marines, and Demon engines. Whether they were located on drifting asteroids or the skeletons of dead vessels, every inch of ground was rigged with lasgrid traps, scattered mines, and booby-trapped corpses. Incursor squads paid a heavy toll to clear out each ambush site, utilizing their Divinator-class Auspexes to fashion a full-spectrum analysis of the battleground and disperse their vital combat data to their battle brothers. Infiltrator squads breached the lightless halls of dead ships, hurling smoke grenades and firing disciplined bursts from their auger-scoped marksman bolt carbines. The tenets of speed and constant movement, central to the art of warfare practiced by the warriors of Dragoris, was stymied by the Night Lord's devious tricks. Yaras Khan and his contingent, masters of the art of stealth and subterfuge, delighted in the challenge provided by the Vanguard Space Marines. Claws of elite Chaos Terminators launched short-range teleportation strikes into the hearts of the White Scars formations, butchering and eviscerating with lightning claw and power axes. Helldrakes preyed upon the White Scars dropships in the vacuum of space, and the nightmarish fiends known as Warp Talons breached the hulls of Space Marine cruisers, running amok in the darkness. For all the cruel ingenuity of the Night Lord's attacks, the White Scars under the command of the Khan adapted with remarkable speed. They feigned desperate retreats, drawing the traitor forces into kill zones of their own. Damaged ships were sacrificed to lure in those Night Lords drunk on the thrill of murder and torture. The ambushers suddenly became the ambushed, as White Scar's warriors appeared in their midst, yelling blood-curdling war cries and engaging the Heretic Astartes in brutal close-quarter battles. Yet even as the momentum of the battle shifted from hour to hour, the Nightmare of Selix remained unseen, still broadcasting its demented song. Until the White Scars had cut off every false signal, the desperate fighting within the tiers of the Emperor would continue. Alas, gentle listeners. At this point, unfortunately, that is the conclusion, with the details contained within the Psychic Awakening, Faith and Fury. I am presuming that the information is elsewhere. I have been told that perhaps the conclusion to all of these tales is in the collector's edition only. I find this to be disappointing. A tale should be a self-contained tale, in my opinion. As it is, though, I shall attempt to find these details for you and present them, perhaps, in my own words. Thank you very much for listening. As always, I have been Baldermort, your faithful servant. If you have enjoyed my rendition of Faith and Fury, please consider liking and subscribing. If you do so, then also do please consider pressing the notification button, and would not wish you to miss out. If you are a regular gentle listener, do also consider joining us on Facebook or Twitter, and if you do see the value in what we are doing, then please do consider joining us on Patreon. Now, as I always say, do try to make some time for fun today. Toodaloo.